going now to do the Building Arts Roundtable, which is going to be led by a fellow of the Classic Planning Institute, Miss Grace Moran. I am going to share screen with you in a second and show you a beautiful piece of work. It's a tabletop, just to illustrate the matter of craft. Ms. Grace Moran is the Director of Sacred Art at the John Canning Company, a decorative painting and ornamental plastering firm in Northwest Connecticut. Check this out, guys. She is excited about, she's devoted to the decorative arts and traditional trades, and as a fellow of the Classic Planning Institute is excited about the practice and preservation of the traditional building arts in both restoration and new construction. Without further ado, Miss Moran, please take it away and take us into the world of handwork.
Well, thank you, Dr. Burrows, for that very kind introduction. And it is a pleasure to be here. The presentations thus far have quite naturally brought us to the present conversation, in which we will endeavor to discuss how these beautiful designs quite literally come into being by the hands of the craftsman. And as I introduce the members of this panel, I'm going to be showing a few photographs of some of their work and the initiatives that they are involved in. So I'm going to share my screen here. Wonderful. So to begin with, Miss Nadia Everard is the co-founder of La Table Ronde Architecture in Brussels, and also works as an architect for Colum Mulhern, designing and restoring buildings in Belgium, France, and Luxembourg. She grew up in Brussels, a place that has been methodically destroyed by global economy and the global architecture. In reaction to this, La Table Ronde Architecture is a young association dedicated to the defense of beauty and durability of our living environments was born. In a spirit of harmonious cooperation and liberty, La Table Ronde Architecture is a community of craftsmen, architects, urbanists, historians, writers, and curious of all sorts who wish to celebrate the learning of centuries of local, sophisticated, and various traditions that have perpetrated around the world. La Table Ronde Architecture is a place of liberty and debate dedicated to the renaissance of arts and crafts. To do so, it organizes workshops, study trips, conferences, film sessions, and a summer school on traditional architecture of Belgium. Thank you, Nadia. Melissa DelVecchio is a partner at Robert A.M. Stern Architects. And excuse me, I'll move to, this is a photograph of some of Nadia's studies with her students at the round table. And to Ms. DelVecchio, a partner at Robert A.M. Stern Architects. She is the design lead for many of the firm's most complex academic and institutional projects, as well as directs the research department. Building upon her education that included an intensive study of classical architecture and a subsequent immersion into contemporary design, her work synthesizes tradition and invention, reinforcing that visual, social, environmental, and cultural influences that give places identity and meaning. Melissa's projects include 2 new residential colleges at Yale University and the first LEED Gold Certificate academic building in China. She is currently working on the restoration and adaptive reuse of the Schwarzman Center at Yale, a historic Caire and Hastings building that will be transformed into a social hub for the university students, and the Ricklin Museum of Art, the anchor of the University of Notre Dame's New Arts District. Melissa is a fellow at the American Institute of Architects, a member of the Richard H. Dreyhaus Prize Jury, the Rafael Manzano Martos Prize Jury, the Ramza Travel Fellowship Jury, and she is currently serving as the Robert A.M. Stern Visiting Professor of Classical Architecture at the Yale School of Architecture. Thank you, Melissa, for joining us today. Darrel Babuk is an architect dedicated to preserving the stories of Canadian heritage and achievement. He comes from a railway family and grew up living by prairie road stations across Western Canada. A professor of his once claimed to have been the last American to have studied at the original École des Beaux-Arts, which heavily influenced his formal education. While living and working in Washington, D.C., Darrel ran student projects for American Institute of Architects. His appreciation for classicism was furthered by travel, as well as the discovery of the Richard Morris Hunt archives just prior to his term's commencement. After working in DC, Darrel took a position in Chicago, conserving many early modernist Chicago Prairie School buildings. Living in Chicago presented the opportunity to research the history of early modernism in North America. Upon reestablishing his practice in Canada, Darrel placed his research into the works and influence of Montreal architects William and Edward Maxwell. He also has since furthered his study of the City Beautiful plans by Thomas Mawson for Calgary, Regina, and Victoria. Studying that area of Canadian architecture also reveals work by McKim, Mead and White, Warren and Whitmore, and many more. Thank you, Darrel, for joining us today. Sten Havumaki is the owner of Oak Laurel Workshop in Biddeford, Maine, a custom woodworking shop that specializes in traditional architectural carving and ornamental millwork for new construction and restoration projects. He is a 2009 graduate of the furniture making program at the North Bennett Street School in Boston. Sten currently lives near Portland, Maine, with his wife and 2 young children. Thank you, Sten. Alejandro Garcia Hermida is an associate professor at the Department of Architectural Composition at the Escuela Técnica Superior de Arquitectura at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. He graduated with a degree in architecture and holds a master's in architectural restoration, as well as a PhD from the same university. Alejandro was a visiting scholar at the School of Architecture at the University of Notre Dame and taught for 10 years at the Universidad Alfonso X El Sabio. His professional practice has been focused on traditional architecture and construction and restoration and study of historic buildings, mainly in Spain and Morocco. He is the executive director of the Richard H. Dreyfus Initiatives in Spain and Portugal, director of the Journal of Traditional Building, Architecture and Urbanism, member of the board of Tereshita, and vice chair of Intibao Spain. Some of his works he has directed or co-directed have been awarded the 2015 Intibao Excellence Award, the 2019 Hispania Nostra Award, and the special mention at the 2019 European Union Europa Nostra Awards. And last but not least, we have Patrick Webb, who was raised squarely in the arts and craft tradition. He is a heritage and ornamental plasterer, an educator, and an advocate for the specification of natural, historically utilized plasters, clay, lime, gypsum. Patrick learned the craft as a child from his father and continued to seek apprenticeship from highly skilled plasters in the United States. Eventually, Patrick went abroad to work with the master plasters of their respective traditions in France, Italy, Germany, the UK, and Morocco. Patrick was privileged to teach for several years at the American College for the Building Arts in Charleston, South Carolina. And in addition to practicing his craft, his remaining energies are directed towards education through hosting workshops in advanced technical skills, the traditional design principles for plasters, hands-on lectures regarding plaster as an architectural specification for institutional academic preservation, and architectural programs around the United States, as well as a significant amount of writing and lecturing on the underlying philosophy of the arts and crafts. You will notice that this panel is a mixture of architects and craftsmen. That is intentional in order to discuss the building arts in the same manner in which the construction should be completed as a conversation or a cooperation between the two. And so thank you all for joining the conversation today, and thank you all to those listening. And I would like to pose the first question to the panel, and I will remove my screen share. First question to the panel, which aims to begin simply by discussing the trades that are classified within the art category of the building arts. And the question is, what are the building arts? And though this may seem as an obvious question, in our modern time, building as an art is often a foreign concept. So with that, I do put it out to our panelists for their thoughts. and feel free to chime in quite naturally.
I believe that the building arts are an expression of the society that built that building.
And as a, as far as it being an expression of the society that built that building, and the process in which the title building arts actually begs the question, is building an art as an expression?
If I may answer again, yes, it is. The forms of our settlements, the layouts of our towns and cities, to the way in which a society presents the buildings that they live in, express the nature, the beliefs of that particular society. And while the building arts may sound superfluous, no, it's not superfluous. All built form presents itself in some form of art, be it a positive or malevolent form. I'm championing for the positive form. The positive form, connection to society, the expression of that society, it's something that we need. It's our DNA. More and more, I feel that various health organizations are beginning to realize the importance of mental health. And I feel that traditional classical building types, traditions in various societies around the world, connects us in such a way so that we can maintain emotional intelligence. Otherwise, we lose it. We become devoid as a society.
That's a very interesting perspective. Did someone have something to add? Go ahead.
If I could make a contribution, I think from my perspective, yeah, I don't really care that much. This may sound strange, but I don't really care that much about the art in the sense of the things that we create. In a certain sense, even the finest craftsman, his work is not that beautiful, but what it is, it's saturated in human attention. So I think really it's an expression of us, and that's why we care about it. That's why we care about those things. If we look at a leaf, pick up any leaf, right, a weed outside, and look at the myriad of details, layer upon layer, the intrinsic beauty in it. Anything I could sculpt in plaster or stone or wood wouldn't compare. But it's a sympathetic act of communication across time and space that when you look at that and you see it, you resonate, because it's like someone did that. And I think that's where the appreciation comes from. I appreciate the artist. I appreciate the craftsman more than I do the art.
Alejandro, or
maybe every building craft could be considered an art whenever it is working to achieve beauty. And this may be conscious or unconscious, because when a craftsperson is following a tradition, probably this craftsperson is just because it's drawing on what many generations have developed to achieve beauty. It's achieved naturally, and it may be not a conscious step forward going into creating art, but it may be art just because it's beautiful, because it somehow reflects all that thought which has been applied to that particular craft over the centuries.
I agree with Alejandro, and I think it's also a sign of important collaborations between architects and the many people that it takes to get these buildings built.
It's interesting how important the collaboration between the two is, and as far as kind of carrying on that tradition of craft, how that is handed on, as far as through apprenticeships and studies. I wonder, in your experience, as far as the craftsmen on this panel and the architects, in your experience of dealing with the trades, what the shop relationship might be as it relates to the master and the craftsman, and what your experiences have been in those studios.
Well, I can speak from an architect's point of view of doing this on really quite a large scale, which is what those Yale residential colleges were. It took a lot of thought and strategy for us to figure out how we could get the right amount of craft and detail on this building, and we had to approach certain things in one way and other things in another way. I think one of the best examples of collaboration for me, some of the images that you showed, is the ironwork. And so I've done other panel discussions actually with Kovac's Design, which was the ironwork house that worked with us on that project. And, you know, to us, it was a collaboration from the very beginning, the inception of those gates. We did not start a design and hand it to the craftsman. It was a drawing process that we embarked on together so that we could understand the constraints and the connections and the traditional techniques, and where we could use traditional techniques, and where, in order to get all of the gates all around the project, we had to use some more modern techniques. But in the end, it was a true collaboration from the beginning to the end, that went from the very first sketches through to the time that we spent with them in the workshop. And they even went so far as to bring in our whole team and actually have us try to get out the hammer and bend the metal so we could understand exactly how difficult it was. There was almost no one on my team who could do it. There was one woman who managed to do quite a good job of it, but it's a real talent.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I wonder if I may pick up on something that you had just mentioned, Melissa, and then something Patrick had brought up, as far as acknowledging the craft as something as inspired by the natural world. And Patrick had mentioned a leaf and how that might inspire. The acanthus leaf has inspired so much within architecture. And so it is, in a sense, an imitation of what we see. And so I wonder if I might ask how far imitation might go when it comes to automation, and to where the boundaries between imitating the natural world and imitating design begin and end as it relates to the automated designs that we have today. And an example of that might be printing, or in the sense of three-dimensional printing and of the like.
There was a great deal of discussion about that in the original World's Exposition at Crystal Palace in 1853, where there suddenly were a lot of machine-made artifacts presented, but they lacked substance and they lacked that connection. They lacked a connection to the human form, because we really had no part in creating those. They were something that was made to mimic what we would do. What we do is pretty great, pretty wonderful, and very fabulous. A machine can't do that. A machine does what machines do, but they're not us.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's very important. What you are saying is that with the machine, we don't have all the imperfection that give humanity to those buildings. Yeah, for our association, this is very important so we see the building arts as a collaborative process where we are building for the people, with the people. So I'm working on small sites and with small craftsmen in Belgium. And the students are directly working with them on small projects. And so they understand, they can be architects, or they can be also studying the crafts, but also art history. But they are directly learning how to do it. And when you see that process, they create something which is very personal and that cannot be replicated, something which has a soul, and something that they can be proud of. And I think this is, for us, the most important thing is, it's not only that the crafts, the building arts, they bring durability and sustainability in the building environment, but it's also, it brings humanity in the building environments. And I think it's something which is missing, of course, in modernist building, but also in some traditional architecture that which are using modernist techniques. So we have lots of composite materials, artificial materials, and cavity walls. And which creates lots of problems because those buildings don't last the same way. But also they are not seen the same way by the people. Yes.
Well, I beg to differ a little bit because I think, humankind and craftspeople have always used new tools and new technology, whether they be, hand tools or computerized tools. There's always been a growth in technology in the building arts and in all of crafts. And I don't, from my standpoint, I don't see a problem if CNC machining can take you part of the way with the stone carving much faster and much more efficiently than hand carving. I mean, you may use the hand carving to get the finishing touches and the human touch that does that last, say, 25% of the carving, but you can use the machines to get you a long part of the way there. And I think to say that we as a civilization have not taken advantage of technology in all the building arts over the centuries is this isn't the right approach. I think we need to use both things.
No, I mean, you're completely right. I mean, for the work which is fastidious, as you said, stone carving, I mean, all details that people don't see at the human scale, those details, I think they can be done by CNC and those kind of machine. And there are, I mean, most craftsmen I know here in Belgium and some in UK, they use both. So they do both, and they have the joy of doing it by hand. And sometimes, as I said, it's very fastidious, and so it's good for the very repetitive thing that they have to do. Yeah.
I just heard. Oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, as a carver, you're talking about carving and CNC work. Like, this is an example of actually, in the pictures you show, this was one of the parts of those capitals. But I created a model which was scanned and then CNC'd, and then I hand carved the model first, so it wasn't like a computer generated thing. So, and then I have a friend in Boston who gets 90% of the way there, and it's still pretty tedious to get in there and clean it all up. There's a lot missing, and there's no way you can go off the tool. It's just way too fuzzy, and the machine marks are just not acceptable. So so that's an example of I'm not so precious about technique and wood, and it's just a medium for me. It's a way to express those shapes sometimes, or if it's about the wood, then it's about the wood. But sometimes I just carved a sign in foam. Actually, I used HDU foam, and for a library, and it looks beautiful. It's all painted in gold leaf, and it's got the pediment, scrolled pediment, and it'll last a long time, and it looks beautiful. Looks just like the old one. So
previously I heard the word joy being mentioned, and I think that's probably the key here, and I would describe it as pride. The pride that we as humans take in building our buildings, and whatever sort of craft that we can employ to do those buildings, that's our connection to that building. That's what's the important part. That's the connection between building arts and actually what we're doing as a function, is that pride. And I think that's very important.
I think we're all 21st century people now. We're all tools, right? We're all tools working for the machines. We work for our BMWs, we work for our iPhones, we work for Zoom. I want to remind folks really where the words technology and architect come from. Of course, they're of Greek origin. Architect is the chief or the master craftsman. He was the one responsible for the building project because he had started off as an apprentice and worked his way up through the system. Technology itself, logia, logos, knowledge, a deep inner knowledge, and a knowledge of what? Technique, again, craft. So I'd like our words back as craftsmen, master craftsmen, architects, and technology, the deep knowledge of how to build. William Morris, he said, and I'll just paraphrase, what is a craftsman but a workman that is determined that no matter what else happens, his work shall be excellent. And it's empowering, it's ennobling. It's not just about literacy or numeracy, it's about efficacy. It's about the ability to do, to make, to provide for oneself. And, you know, in this 3D printed and CNC world, you know, what place is there for excellence? You know, this isn't a new problem. He wrote that in the, you know, late 19th century. By that time, you know, ornament had generally been replaced by machines had replaced hand-carved ornament anyway. This is nothing new. This is a very old issue. It's only coming up again because we're having a renewed interest in traditional architecture.
Well, you could look at it as machines inching out the craftspeople, or you could look at it as the assistance of machines and the assistance of some automated processes making traditional architecture on a large scale possible again, which then opens the door for those craftspeople to add their, you know, to spread their hand done 20% of the end of the carving across more projects and to get more work done and to get more of this work onto buildings. So I think if you're really advocating for beauty and you're advocating for traditional architecture, you know, you have to take both things. You have to understand where the technology can actually be incredibly useful. And I think the craftspeople that we have worked with who do fabricated molded cast stone, they take just as much pride in the technology that they're using, and they take just as much pride in the excellence of their work as the hand stone carver does. And in the end, you know, in order to achieve a project on a big scale like the Yale College, we need to make use of all of those things. We have completely hand-done things. We have things that were computer-assisted. We mix cast stone and real stone, and we things in different places around the building. So if it's way up high where you can see it less, we might use a different technique than if it's right around a door surround at the bottom of the building. And if you want this to happen on big projects and you want this to be an affordable endeavor and you want there to be work for the craftspeople, I think you have to acknowledge that technology can help too.
You know, you do speak there. This reminds me of a conversation I had with Andres Duani at the first tag, and it concerned the problem of large numbers. And he laid out just what you're saying. We're going to provide beautiful places for everyone. We have to centralize that and then convert it into an industrialized process so it'll be efficient. That way we can multiply beauty everywhere. But I did bring it to his attention that we do have a problem of large numbers of all these people that we need to take care of. And what we actually have, we have one resource, as others are dwindling, in superabundance today that we've never had in human history. And that is human beings that are increasingly unemployed or employed in things that are completely devoid of meaning, that make them passive and dependent on systems, that be they mechanical systems or codification. And so, you know, I see this particularly even in industrial countries. I mean, it's probably even more evident. I go to Europe and the average unemployment of young people hovers anywhere from 35 to 50%. It's probably increased since COVID. And yet, you know, even my trade, plaster, which is almost impossible to industrialize. You know, I was approached last time I was working over there, offered a €2 billion grant to work with a team of roboticists and computer engineers to just a grant. And they said there will be more money to come so that they can convert what I do into an industrialized process. No doubt to, you know, bring beauty and make it multiply across the world on the basis of, you know, fossil fuels and maybe, you know, nuclear technologies.
I'm hearing the argument of economics again, and that's a concept that's been brought up previously in some of the other breakout rooms that I've attended here. One of my historian colleagues in Chicago once made the comment that the United States progressed from being an agricultural economy very soon to becoming an industrialized economy because it was felt that their labor was too expensive. So they had to have machines suddenly do things that people were doing before. I look at some of the crafts and trades that I bring onto my projects, and I'm very, very scared that there may not be enough craftsmen out there to do the sort of work, even if it's partially industrialized, mechanized, There may not be enough workers out there to do the sort of work that's necessary for my buildings. Bricklayers. Canada does not have any brickyards, for example, so we've lost the economic argument. I deal mainly with a lot of masonry buildings, stone and brick buildings, and I'm getting very worried about people who understand bricks and mortar more than just simply putting up veneer. A good example, one of the slides in my introduction, it was the stone grotesque, and it's at a school here in Edmonton. When I found it, it was missing its snout. And I just joked with the principal, well, sure, I could fix that for you. And sure enough, the Parent-Teacher Association found that this was a very proud sort of feature. They got together and they raised money for it. Talking around to a variety of my colleagues, suddenly this was magic, everything coming together. I found that the head carver of Stavanger Cathedral in Norway would be in town. His grandmother was celebrating her 100th birthday. So we simply offered him some money to stick around town. Using a materials scientist in my office, we sourced the stone. We sourced various pin types it would take to do a simple Dutchman repair. I wrote into the contract to hire the stone carver that he would give a half-day presentation to the student body at the school to show them what he was doing. Because again, I'm very scared that many of their school guidance counselors are trying to channel them into areas that I may not be able to use. Turns out that there were 3 students who approached their school guidance counselors after that presentation who wanted to pursue some sort of an education and career in stone cutting. I felt very good about that.
Education in the trades is hugely important.
Oh, yeah.
All building trades, even the ones that maybe we find less glamorous, are hurting for people right now. There's a lot of jobs available. At the same time, there's a lot of people without jobs. I think, we as a society have to value these contributions and have to start to place value again on work that doesn't necessarily involve going to college, that involves different kinds of training and different kinds of expertise and different ways to build that expertise. And, I don't think any of us are arguing against that.
No, there's a great deal of personal satisfaction that you can actually get, and some of the craftsmen here may speak to this. Personal satisfaction of actually getting your hands dirty and creating something. Yeah, that's that personal connection that we're losing, that I fear, with modernity.
Yeah, there's sort of like a autonomy and a power to make something from raw materials, and if you need something, you can make it. I mean, it doesn't apply to everything, but with wood, it's a material that can be used for a variety of all sorts of things, utilitarian and beautiful things. But yeah, I can speak to the idea of that sense of satisfaction from taking a project from raw materials all the way to a finished, beautiful, installed project.
Buena onda. Vaya, me dice, está bueno. Y le digo mal si se va con la...
Someone needs to mute.
Va pinchada. Él pensó que solo aire, ¿verdad? Entonces, pero se le ocurrió llevar.
I'm not sure if someone could go in and...
iPhone Carlos.
Pues,
please.
Mute. Please to mute.
Solo necesita aire.
Could... I don't know. Thank you. Thank you very much.
He's on the phone hiring an artisan.
Hopefully. I don't know at this point if Mr. Hamida, if you would like to add anything to this conversation. I know you and your initiatives are very active in restoring the traditional way of doing things.
Regarding education, I think something which is also true is that even if there are many people that they don't know that there are these opportunities to be trained, there is also a lack of, at least in some countries, like in Spain is the case, a consistent system of education. There is a lack of a real structure all over the country, which is homogeneous to teach the crafts. I know that in other countries this is not a problem. I know that it is the case here, and it is the case also in other countries. I guess in the US you may have similar problems like unbalanced teaching in different regions and these kind of things. So the lack of that is also not helping to have a healthy transmission of this knowledge. And then another thing which is also affecting this is regulations. Here, at least in Spain, this is affecting it very much, because sometimes regulations almost exclude some kind of crafts. Not all of the crafts, but some of the crafts are completely excluded by regulations which are conceived to build in a certain way. And this is happening even in countries like Morocco, where crafts are very healthy, and you suddenly see that to build a new building, which is according to the building code, you have to build in concrete. So then, yeah, of course, you can finish the things traditionally, but if the building must be in concrete just because the regulations say so to be approved, then of course part of the crafts are already being less demanded, so there will be less people that will be interested in learning that craft because there will be not that many job opportunities. So I think also it's not only that it's difficult like to know that there are these training opportunities, but also that some of those who are trained then they cannot find a job because it's almost forbidden to work in that way, at least in some places.
I would add to that, in education, issue particularly here in the US, there are still, in some of the countries in Europe, Germany and France and England, even though they're suffering, they still have some educational infrastructure that goes back actually to medieval times. I think of the Compagnon system in France and the Zimmermann system and some of the schools in England and the cathedral system there. But in the US, it's just taken for granted that for architecture, it's important. So billions of dollars every year comes out of the public coffers for schools of architecture. When it comes to traditional crafts in particular, there's nothing. I mean, there's no resources at all for it. And so to ask the young person who's interested in craft to actually pursue that as a career, is a Herculean task for them. For society to, we're going to have the things that we value, and whether or not this is ultimately the way to do things, it's the way we do things now. We have to put our money where we say our values are. So until that changes, it will, I think it'll always be a struggle and an uphill battle. I know personally, I live in North Carolina now, and for this vast state, I'm the only traditional heritage ornamental plasterer in the entire state. Now, when I look around at the inventory of homes here and civic buildings, just 100 years ago, there must have been hundreds of plasterers, probably most of them much better than I was, to do the work that just is still existent here.
There was a fascinating comment just a while back. We had to start building out of concrete because that's what the seismic code said. I'm thinking of the difference of building codes that I see between Chicago and Alberta, we could say Canada as a whole. In Chicago, the masonry labor trades are very unionized and very active. So you find a lot of brick and what I would call fireproof buildings, but here it's the other way around. You find the wood and the forestry industry has got an awful lot of clout. So you can build wood buildings far larger here than you could there. And I can think of an example in Toronto where there's actually a proposal to build a 105-floor tower out of timber. Building codes are restricting building arts because they're forcing us to do these mechanized things. Yes, there is a labor shortage. We need trained people who can do the sorts of work that I need to do as a restoration architect. However, much of that, and certainly the new build things that we're seeing being built now, are all controlled by building codes that are pointing away from traditional building arts. That's where we come in as a lobby force. We need to get our point across. Ms. DelVecchio, because you work for a very large firm, you do very large projects with current building codes. I'd be really curious to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I was just thinking you might let that one slide and not jump in, but I don't really see that. I have to say,
Okay.
You know, I can't say that we have felt constrained in achieving what we want to achieve architecturally by building codes in any substantial way. Now, that's to say, most of the large institutions that we build for actually want us to some degree to use modern building techniques. So they too are in support of that. They don't want to build, necessarily solid stone walls. They probably can't afford them. They also want higher insulation value. They want certain aspects of modern construction. So maybe for us, it doesn't present itself as an either or. I could imagine, I see Alejandro's point in I know his work with those projects in Morocco, and it's a shame to me that those traditional trades, are being lost there. So maybe the question is better directed at Alejandro or others.
Certainly.
I see some comments in the chat regarding the promotion, how the promotion of these skills is done. I know that within our own spheres, we might see different things handed on, but truly the idea of and this is mentioned here, the apprentice journeyman. How, I guess I put to this panel, how do you propose that is done? And how do you see that done, at least in your experiences, or not seen it done? And in the case of not, what do you see as a solution?
Before we continue, I would like to make a little notification, please. May I, Ms. Moran?
Of course.
We have opened, based on popular demand, pardon me, we are going to have, after the session, once the day closes officially, we're going to have 4 breakout rooms where you can actually continue the conversations from today. They are the 4 seasons. I think it's winter, spring, summer, and autumn. I think I got it right. Anyways, there are four rooms, and go ahead and mingle. It's I think they're going to be open for an hour or so afterwards, and knock yourselves out with regard to that. Excuse me for interrupting. We're back on track.
I don't know if you'd like me to repeat the question, but really it was, how do we promote the idea of apprentice?
Yeah, I think one important thing is that it has to be promoted at school, so secondary school, and maybe sooner kindergarten, because at that time, here in Belgium, and I know it's the same in France. I mean, we have the Compagnon du Devoir in Belgium and in France too. It's less active in Belgium, but the problem is that those building arts, they are how do you say, méprised. People are seeing them as the jobs for the young people with problem. So at school they don't speak at all about those jobs. And that's a very, very big problem. They push students towards communication study, sometimes study that I just can't understand, medicine, architecture, laws, but never, I mean, because I'm talking here with the schools in Brussels, they don't speak about crafts. Students don't know that those jobs exist and that they are amazing jobs. You can, I mean, amazing because there is a lot of joy and, as you said, pride, but also you can get money from them. So often also the problem is with the parents. The parents think that those jobs will lead them to something which is not good for the future. So I think one thing that is very important is to promote this in schools. Kindergarten, secondary school, and then high school. But also to create some traditional building arts schools in large cities, and even if it can be done in small village, because this and this should be open not only to students but to everyone interested in the building crafts, because one thing which is, I mean, in Belgium and in France, really interesting is there is lots of participative construction sites. So, which we know is vernacular architecture, so architecture without architects. So people learning crafts for, I mean, they are building for them, but with their community. So those projects are great for, I mean, to bring inclusion in a community, also to create something which has an identity. Yeah.
Just want to check in how we're doing on time as far as the boss, just as far as an update there. I don't, otherwise we'll continue here.
This is the scheduled end time for the session in 1 minute. So now would be a good time to wrap up for some final thoughts.
So I have one last question to kind of follow up what Nadia had just mentioned as far as schools. There was a question in the chat regarding, yes, school, but I don't want to go to school and then not have a job afterwards. So as far as really creating an environment in which this isn't just taught, but practiced, what is the suggestion in that case?
That would be a strong apprenticeship program to make sure that students who are studying the crafts have a landing spot.
And also teaching the schools of architecture. That's very important too, because that's a way to create more job opportunities also for all the crafts. And not only in the schools of architecture, as it was mentioned by Nadia, it should start earlier and even be part of the general education to talk about how do we transform our environment in general and somehow include again things which have been removed from the educational system.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to support what Nadia is saying 100%. So grammar school is not even good enough. You have to start from kindergarten. One of the things that I experienced at the American College of the Building Arts, you know, we had young people. This is an important thing to keep in mind. Most of them had been to college, and they just, it's not that they weren't smart. It's just that kind of abstract working in an office, or that type of environment just didn't resonate with them as a human being. We're all different. Not everyone can make that adjustment. But they had a big difficulty when they came to the college, and despite the fact that they knew that other life wasn't for them, they were almost crippled by embarrassment. And what I mean by that, it's kind of like dealing with an illiterate person. It's not that you can't teach an adult how to read. You can. They can learn actually probably faster than children. What they have to overcome is the fact that for decades they never did, and they kind of have this shame, and I think many people have that as well, and it kind of affects their view of the crafts because they are inefficacious. It's like a person who can't dance and being thrown on the dance floor. The big obstacle to learning at that point as an adult or as a young adult is getting over your own embarrassment. And so it's helpful. We give the children in kindergarten the Play-Doh, the paint, we give them all the crafts. And then by first grade, it's all taken away.
Well, thank you very much to everyone on this panel. And to kind of sum that up, I had a thought regarding learning this as an adult, and to equate it to language as it has often been throughout today. Classical architecture, classical design, classical craft, learning a language at a later age is always more difficult and requires the humbling experience of working through and pronunciating things incorrectly. But it must be done if you want to learn that and you want to perfect it. So it's not to say that these things cannot be done today. It's just a matter of learning that language and practicing it within the bounds of our modern time, which of course we have to do. So I'm very grateful to all of you for your time.